Good evening. Welcome again to Politically Incorrect. Let me introduce you to our panel tonight. We have right over here the Executive Director of the Committee for a Free Afghanistan, Mr. Henry Kriegel. Welcome. Hold your applause to the end. Thank you. To his right, of course, is Marlee Matlin. She is an Oscar-winning actress and on The West Wing. You were great on it last night, as always. And here with her interpreter, as always, Mr. Jack Jason to my left. Over here we have a syndicated columnist. I read him all the time in the LA Times. He is also a lecturer at the USC's Annenberg School for Communication, Mr. Robert Scheer. And over here, the Executive Vice President of the Feminist Majority Foundation, which I guess people would probably know more as Mavis Leno's organization. And as always, Mavis Leno, way out ahead and smarter than everybody. God bless you, Mavis. Katherine Spillar. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Now, it's about 5:30. We held up our taping. Usually tape at 5 here in L.A., but President Bush was on at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, which is 5 here, so we watched a little bit of his press conference. He said some interesting things. I want to ask, first of all, about this. He mentioned, as he has many times, that we will not allow nations that harbor terrorists to get away with it. Some people have called this the Bush Doctrine, which I think is fitting because it's a whole new wrinkle in how we handle terrorism. My question, and I think Helen Thomas was getting at this in her question, and does he really mean it? Because if you want to really go after the nations that harbor terrorists, you're talking about going after Syria. You're talking about going after Iran. He mentioned, when she followed up, he said, well, we'll go after Al-Qaeda, which is bin Laden's organization, wherever they are in the world. Well, they're nowhere else in the world, probably, except where we're going after them. But Hezbollah is Iran, Lebanon is controlled by Syria, Hamas, I think Libya probably has a pretty dirty hand in all this. Are we really willing to do that, is my first question to this panel.
Well, the one country you didn't mention is Saudi Arabia, where the largest number of these hijackers came from. It's a country that announced that it's not cooperating with us in searching for the money. It's a country that's been very aggressive in pushing out a fundamentalist Islamic view that has been adopted by the Taliban. And I doubt if the Bush administration will lean on Saudi Arabia. So there's one contradiction right there.
You know, although we are going after the Taliban, no question about that, 2 years ago, as part of our campaign, we called on the administration to declare the Taliban a terrorist organization itself. And to this day, that has not happened. It would give us even more power to go after them, freezing of assets, and we didn't come down hard enough on its allies until recently. As Bob mentioned, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and the United Arab Emirates have all funded the Taliban.
We still pretend that the Taliban and bin Laden are somehow two separate entities.
Not at all.
They're not.
They're one and the same.
Bin Laden controls the Taliban. It's clear.
Yeah.
And, you know, if our intent of the United States is going to be shown in Afghanistan, I think the jury really is out as to whether or not President Bush has it in his intent and will to actually overthrow the Taliban and help the Afghans determine their own new government and help them rebuild that country. As you know, the Pakistani government, they funded the fundamentalist resistance during the entire Soviet war, and they funded and supported and trained and fought along the Taliban and got them into power, okay? It is not very clear to me that we're going to actually do the job correctly in Afghanistan. We abandoned them 12 years ago when the Soviets withdrew. President Bush's father abandoned the Kurds when he asked the Kurds from around the world to rise up and return to Iraq and overthrow Saddam Hussein. When the day came, General Schwarzkopf was told to stand down and not go to Baghdad. We have a record of betraying the very people we urged to rise up and overthrow their tyrant leaders. Will we do that in Afghanistan? That's to be determined. If we don't do it in Afghanistan, we don't have a chance in Iraq or anywhere else.
Yes?
It's obvious that we need help from other countries, cooperation on the behalf of other countries. It's obvious to me in this battle.
Right, but we keep pretending that these countries are really on our side, and I don't know if they really are. I mean, Afghanistan is the easy one, because it's really a state of chaos there. It's the poorest country, it's the easiest one to take over. Obviously not if we wanted to actually occupy it, because it has chewed up armies before. But it's not a country like Syria or Iran, where we would really have to fight an army Are we willing to go that route? Because he keeps saying we're going to bring all the evildoers. First he called them folks. And then they became evildoers. There's no middle ground with this guy. Round them up.
How much does the UN have to help us in this sort of cause, do you think?
The UN?
Yeah, I'm just asking. Is the UN effective in any way?
You know, I'm for kicking ass. To me, this is not a UN issue. This is years away from being a UN issue.
Well, the UN has a big role to play in all of this, and isolating countries that harbor and export terrorism is going to be very key. And you know, the United States doesn't have clean hands in this. To say it was only Pakistan that funded the Mujahideen, including the Taliban, is inaccurate. It was a CIA-funded operation during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. So, we have a special duty to these people.
With all due respect, where was the UN with your issue? I mean, your issue, and I think it's a completely righteous one, is the way women are treated, mostly in Afghanistan, but they are not treated in the entire Islamic world the way they are treated in the Western world. People argue whether this is a clash of civilizations. It's certainly a clash over the way we treat women.
The United Nations has never shown leadership when it comes to dealing with terrorism or any real threat to the world's security. The United States is the leader. We're taking the leadership role now. I think the question, Bill, really speaks to the political will of our leadership and the will of our country. And we have to be mindful of the fact that this is not just a physical war on terrorism in Afghanistan and elsewhere. It's a war for the minds and hearts of the people. And this press conference and other communications that are going on are geared. The people in the United States and the people in the Muslim world.
Well, those are two very different people.
They are, but we got to communicate.
I think they got our hearts and minds. If they think they're going to get the hearts and minds of the people all around the Muslim world, that's a whole different story, right?
It is a whole different story.
And we're talking about cultural oppression and political oppression. How do we identify the two and separate the two? And how do you deal with that?
So that's what I was getting at with the issue about the UN. I mean, if the way women were treated in Afghanistan and some other countries, not as harshly, but if it was a racial issue, if half the population, if the black people of a certain country were not allowed to vote, not allowed to drive, were beaten if they went out in public, couldn't get educated, wouldn't that have caused a hue and cry in the United Nations?
I want to address this. The women were the first victims of the Taliban. They have been terrorized by the Taliban now since the Taliban seized power in 1996. We were the canaries in the coal mine. We should have recognized that a regime that would so oppress and terrorize half its population as part of its control mechanism would export terrorism around the world. And the United Nations and the United States has not made women's human rights a fundamental bottom line in international policy. And it is now we can see what a terrible mistake that was.
And that needs to change. I believe that needs to change.
It needs to change. It definitely needs to change. And you know what? I congratulate your organization for taking that issue on, taking on UNICAL, and taking on a U.S. government during the Clinton administration.
Isn't that too easy?
Not just Afghanistan. We haven't demanded enough of other countries that in the name of culture and the name of religion have oppressed.
Is it not within the culture and the religion that women are second-class citizens?
No, that is not the issue. Let me just say that one thing.
What about Saudi Arabia? Once again, our big friend. How do they treat women?
As Kathy can tell you,
terrible.
Afghanistan was not this backward, terrible place.
No, it wasn't.
Afghanistan was moving towards a secular society. Women went to college. There were many women physicians. If you want to take Mavis Leno's testimony, the program the feminist majority had, the films they made, these people have been talking about this for years. We created these monsters, along with the Pakistanis, along with the Saudis. We helped turn the clock back in Afghanistan. We dragged Afghanistan into the Cold War. We did. We decided that the Mujahideen, enemies of our enemies are our friends. We armed these people, even as early as 6 months before the Soviets went in. We said these are the freedom fighters. We said they are to be preferred to anything else. We trained bin Laden. We trained the Taliban. And we have a responsibility, it seems to me, to end their rule.
First of all, that assumes that what the Soviet Union did in Afghanistan was acceptable. They were committing acts of genocide. They dropped bombs shaped as toys for the kids to pick up. Pakistanis control the flow of weapons to the fundamentalist elements in the Mujahideen, the resistance, to the neglect of the good people in the Northern Alliance, led by Commander Massoud.
The good people of the Northern
Alliance,
That's,
led by
I don't think so.
You know what? That's very wishful thinking.
It would be a tragedy if we settled for another extremist regime only to replace this extremist regime.
Well, these illusions like the Northern Alliance, they're all just good people.
No one is really white in Afghanistan, but however, Commander Massoud, who led the Northern Alliance until he was taken out by a bin Laden terrorist 2 days before the attack on the Americas, he worked extremely well with U.S., British, and French medical personnel. He had humanitarian relief for his people. Women played a valued role in his society as educators and as medical relief personnel. He wanted to bring Afghanistan into the modern era. Okay,
yes, he was better than the other guy.
Which is not saying very much.
And you know what? That's the point I think you're missing.
Far better.
In a bad world, you always got to pick the one guy who's better than the other guy. But we got to take a commercial. We'll be back. All right, welcome back. One other thing President Bush said in his press conference tonight, he said, we can't let the terrorists frighten Americans to the point where they don't go about their business. And he quickly added, where people don't shop.
Listen, my friends tell me not to go to the mall on Halloween. I'm getting these emails saying, don't go to the mall and tell everybody about it. You know, and I'm sorry I sent that email out. I think we focused a lot on the news to the point where there's so much information that it actually scares people. People like me. I mean, for example, they talk about how unsafe it is to fly, and they keep saying it over and over and over again to the point where there's breaking news every time there's like a car accident or something of that sort. I mean, after a while, people won't even drive. I mean, it's really safer to fly than it is to drive. But I'm losing sleep over it, and I don't know what to do.
And that's exactly what I was getting at. We get these mixed messages. On the one hand, they keep saying, return to normal. That's what we have to do, is just go about your business. But then it was in the news that Karl Rove and Karen Hughes, the closest political advisors, have been quietly meeting with public relation firms to keep Americans focused on the war effort. I don't know how much more focused we could be.
How much more focused can you be? It's almost the point of micro-reporting.
Well, there's a real value for public relations and communications. Every time there's a new development in this war on terrorism, Americans need to be informed. It really is an honor and a privilege to communicate to Americans. It ought to be Bush rather than Osama bin Laden.
There aren't that many actual new developments.
But we've got to stay focused, hopefully, on what we're going to do to avoid these terrorist attacks again. We've got to get rid of these terrorists. We've got to get rid of the Taliban, and we've got to help Afghanistan rebuild its democracy that was stolen from it 15 years ago.
We also have to build our own
humanitarian aid.
We also have to build our own democracy. You have a press conference in which people don't ask tough questions. You have the media cheerleading like crazy. America goes to war. America unites. America's sorrow. You know, there are real questions to ask. Where was our intelligence agencies all these years? We give them between $30 and $50 billion a year. How come they didn't know one word about what was going on? Here was the most watched guy in the world is out there. We have satellites that can read a license plate. How could this guy pull off this sophisticated effort and not know anything about it? I think we have to ask tough questions about the end game. Where are we headed here? Why did we focus on this one target? Do we know anything more about these hijackers? They say they've arrested these people. We haven't found out anything at all about them.
The deal is that we...
Whoa. I can't hear everybody at once.
And what are we going to do to get more humanitarian aid into this region so that it is no longer a breeding ground for terrorism? The conditions are so desperate. We have got to do more. The administration has stepped forward, but we need billions. And we need schools, and we need different opportunities in this area so that the terrorists don't have a place to recruit those people who will go on to commit terrorism around the world.
And that's what will stop them, is schools and money?
It's very vital, and we've got to be talking about that as part of the bigger picture. And the country must stay focused on that.
That is not the answer.
Right now.
Oh, it's a very vital part of the answer, because
well, the terrorists were educated and wealthy.
But I'm talking about the ground troops that the Taliban is able to recruit.
Well, the ground troops didn't fly into the buildings. It was the terrorists.
What we need really is human intelligence. We needed human intelligence. We relied much too much on the sophisticated satellite technology. We got out of Afghanistan, the U.S. We got out of the region. We pulled our human resources. We had no clue, really, what was happening. We had information overload. We were incapable of deciphering all that information to determine what was the next
But
strike.
if I may get back to the question I asked, not that all this isn't interesting, it is. Has nothing to do with what I was asking about, which was how much reminding is too much. I worry that we are getting desensitized. It reminds me when I tried to quit smoking once, I once pasted a picture on my refrigerator of this disgusting, there was an ad in a magazine of a woman, they said if your lungs, if the inside of your lungs, if you look like that on the outside, so they made someone up with this black gook on them and they were dilapidated. I looked at it for a week, I didn't smoke, and then I got used to it. And, you know, you cannot watch TV for 2 seconds without being reminded of this. It's in the network logo. When I see the network logo come up with the American flag, I don't think our brave men and women. I think, oh, well, Fox has to, you know, catch up with the other networks. They have to. I mean, I think it's in advertising. Advertising we are trained to look at with a cynical eye. I see it in advertising, and I think they're using this to sell me stuff. And that doesn't... So don't we have more of a threat of becoming desensitized by having it in our face every second than a need to remind us? Isn't that already there?
All I was saying is that we've got to stay focused on the right things to prevent this in the future. We have to take away the recruiting grounds of the terrorists. We can no longer allow an entire country to become their recruiting ground and a country that is participating in the export of terrorism around the world. And humanitarian aid is a big part of that, because if people weren't so desperate, they wouldn't so easily fall victims to these militias.
There's lots of people who are not
we have
that
a duty
desperate
back to this area.
and still hate us.
Let's talk.
They hate us for other reasons, which I know people want to not hear. But it's
You're
true.
absolutely right, and
they
I hope
hate us
that
for
this
other
begins
reasons.
to inform our foreign policy, and we don't make the same
They hate
mistake.
us because they hate everything we stand for. They hate the fact we stand for freedom, we stand for peace, we stand for values that we all love and cherish. It's just an absolute hatred. And getting back to your question about the media,
I have to take a break, but we will come back. Let me quickly follow up on something you said about our intelligence agencies. And I think everyone is pointing the finger at them, and of course they deserve some of the blame. But you know what? I think America has not dealt with our collective guilt. We all knew it was coming. The brake light went on in the car. We just kept driving. The media should have made this something that interested people. Congress should have listened. Warren Rudman begged them to pay attention. The presidents, from the first Bush on, should have used the bully pulpit, and people should have done something. But we didn't want to stop picking internet stocks. So it's not just. And I'll say mea culpa. I was screaming about the drug war for years, and I should have been more on this. So we're all guilty, and I feel it too.
Kathy Spillar is not guilty. For 5 years, she has been warning us about the Taliban, the feminist majority. I went to a thing here, 2 years ago on Sunset Strip. Mavis Leno was there. The Taliban supporters were outside.
Everybody but her.
We tried to sound
I agree. You're right.
There was a movement in this country calling attention, and they were dismissed. You know, basically, the media did ignore them. You had movies, they had all kinds of programs and so forth. So
we were interested in Gary Condit.
Okay, you know what? Listen. Bottom line is, look, I'm married to a cop who will tell you that you got to have an alarm in your house, you got to have bars in your window, you got to have gates on the doors, you got to have all this protection, and you set this all up, and what happens is it still happens. And they come into the house. They break into your house. So our job is now not to point fingers, but to say, look, let's be more vigilant, let's be more alert, and grow up.
And what do we do? And what do we do as we move forward?
We need to look back and see what mistakes we made and learn from them and move forward. This war on terrorism is going to require an unprecedented level of communication and cooperation, and now we need it. Now we needed to move forward. Of course, all of us...
We need communication networks. We need to be able to tell each other what's going on and be open about everything that we hear.
If you want to become a nation where everybody's considered a spy, then they win. You know, I think there's absolutely no evidence that our being a free society made us more vulnerable. What happened here was...
You've got to be kidding about that.
No, absolutely not.
You really have got to be...
We didn't object to sky marshals because of freedom. That was a cost-effective thing. That's why if there had been sky marshals on those airplanes, right, armed sky marshals, which we all agreed was a good thing, this wouldn't have happened.
Right.
These guys had... Well, we never objected to it on civil liberties grounds. It was a budget buster. They wanted to save money. That's why the sky marshals were taken off. You know, I don't think there's we're going to start checking everybody's email.
I have to take a break. I'm sorry. Well, on the guilt issue, let me just add that if this had happened in Japan, a lot of people would have resigned the next day. That's all I have to say.